Long time no see.
It's been a while, and some big news has dropped. Nightreign.
That's right. Some mixed feelings. I'm interested to see where your mixed feelings lie because I think I think I'm mostly positive. There's some things I'm a little bit worried about.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the topic for the day is more about the general sort of trepidation or anxiety from most of the player base. I don't. Maybe it's wrong to say most. I think a lot of people are just generally pretty excited and positive for this game, but it's
Yeah.
interesting that I've seen concerns over just about everything announced for
Just
Night
about
Rain.
everything announced.
Just about everything.
Uh,
Um,
okay. Do you have an example?
yeah, maybe we can start with what I think is probably the most obvious one: the asset reuse. As in, hey, there's the nameless king there. Okay, that's kind of leaning into the Dark Souls lore stuff. So maybe we can cover that at a different point. But it's all in Limgrave, so clearly a lot of the same terrain, architecture, enemies
Right.
used, and
Yes.
lots of the same bosses as well from the previous game. So it's not really. I think we're used to FromSoft games kind of being here's a new game with all new enemies, all new environments, and all that, but it's not got that. And I think for a lot of people, that has perhaps cheapened the feeling when we expect such high quality and innovation and new stuff from FromSoft. I
Hmm.
don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
It is really interesting. It seems to be kind of polarizing. Actually, I don't know if I've seen many comments being explicitly for the reuse, but it mostly seems to be that people are against it when I hear people talk about it. Sort of the most negative form of that is something like you're just making a new game mode that probably should have already been in the base game. You've not really made anything new, but now you're charging $40 for it.
Yeah, but okay. So here's the thing. I've heard. I think it might have been Vardy or maybe it was Ratatoska already said this. But I mean, first of all, FromSoft already reuses a lot of assets as it is. I think Dark Souls 2 felt new from Dark Souls 1, but otherwise, I don't know. I hear a lot of the same sounds in different games, and it feels like a lot of the same, if not models, then at least skeletons are used between games. I just generally, I mean, maybe there's a veneer to each of the things that are reused. Like again, it could use the same bones, but it could have a different mesh, and so that's like just enough to kind of push you past it. But then like basically all of Dark Souls 3's UI from my recollection, like a lot of it was borrowing from Dark Souls 1. And when I say
Okay.
UI, I more mean say the icons. I don't necessarily mean the HUD itself, but like a lot of items use the same graphics as the previous games.
Okay. The way you've explained that, you know, okay, it might have the same skeleton, but there's a different sort of texture applied, or they're using the
Mhm.
same sort of base skeleton, but they've done different animations. Makes it sound like if they didn't do that, you would have a problem.
No, that's the thing. This is I'm more illustrating the fact that they have reused assets in the past, so
Right.
this
Okay.
isn't a new concept.
Okay, so
And
your
in
argument is
fact,
purely just to say we have precedence for this, this kind of already occurs. We either don't notice or don't care because the games are a completely new or fresh experience, something like that.
correct, or even if they're not completely new, like again, when you really boil it down, I think Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 1 feel extremely similar to play, but Dark Souls 3 is obviously like it was a newer game, so there was a bit more polish
Okay.
to the graphics, maybe higher resolution, whatnot. But I think people just loved Dark Souls enough that getting more of that, it's like people are fine with that, and you can kind of look past the things that are reused. Maybe the difference is just that in the past, it's a little subtler. Again, now it's like, hey, you're seeing a bunch of the same bosses in these
Yes,
trailers.
you're right. It's definitely there is a qualitative difference. Like even though it's not Limgrave, I
Mm,
completely understand what you meant by that intuitively because yeah, you look at it and it's Limgrave. Of course it is.
that's right. I think my main point here is that I don't think it's almost been spoken of as like a binary thing. Either you're reusing assets or you're not. Like there's a criticism of this game because it reuses assets. But I don't know if I've really heard a whole lot of nuance around the fact that they're reusing this type of asset, or they're reusing an asset but not adding enough change to it. Because, yeah, again, I can see a lot of things across the previous Souls games that have been reused. So for me, I don't know if that distinction, like, I guess people have to just make it clear that that is the distinction that they have. Maybe it's, I don't want to see the same boss, or I don't want to see the same enemies, or I don't want to see very similar environments. I don't want to see like the same chunks of level used in the next game, unless it's like a very intentionally story driven reason, like Analondo and Dark Souls 3, for example. But I don't know, where do you land on this then? Where, like, is it a binary thing for you, or is there, like, there's a nuance here, or do you not have an issue with the way they've been reusing it? Or, yeah, unpack your thoughts.
I don't at all have a problem with it. Honestly, I wish people were okay with even more reuse. Sometimes there's a game that comes out, and let's say it's a single player game, or let's say it's a hack and slash, but they've made an entire game world, all the animations, like all this rich universe. But then you sit there and you play the game and you think, I'd really like to play a version of this that instead of being a hack and slash, it was actually a strategy game. I'd really like to play a strategy game in this universe, or in this world. And it's a little bit of a daft example, but in that circumstance, no, I don't want you to remake everything. In fact, I'd really like it if the team could save all that time from making things and instead just make a different game using the same thing, because I already like the thing, and it doesn't even enter my mind to think, oh, you're reusing assets. It's not even a concern. Let me think of a slightly more intuitive example. Hearthstone and Hearthstone Battlegrounds. There's a lot of overlap with the cards. There's a lot of overlap with the mechanics, a lot of overlap with the UI. And okay, this literally is a game mode. It's not something you pay for separately. But I want to highlight the idea that you can have literally the same cards in terms of like the graphics for it, but because it's a different game mode, it needs entirely different mechanics. You're not using your mana gems that you gain one per turn. You're using money, and you can actually interact differently. The way that battle cries work is completely different because it's not something that triggers every fight. It's like a once-off thing, and so all of this balance needs to get shifted around. And I would say, wouldn't that be a tragedy if just because one of the designers at Blizzard were like, hey man, I'm really passionate about making this kind of roguelike version of Hearthstone. Instead of it being like a legacy deck builder, it's this kind of contained 40 minutes battleground experience. Imagine if another designer was like, yeah, but you can't use any of our assets. We would think, what are you talking about? Of course do it. And in fact, you might not be able to get the budget to make Battlegrounds if you were forced to do everything from scratch. So there's like an opportunity cost. And I wish more developers were okay with saying, hey, we want to make a spin-off project. We're going to use all of these assets to create an entire new experience. I think that's fantastic, of course.
Okay. So, what about in the case of, say, FromSoft, where you have this AAA game dev studio? I mean, Blizzard would also come into that category, but if we were to say the Hearthstone team, as far as I understand, the teams in Blizzard are quite insulated from each other. Sure, they get influence from each other, but like the Hearthstone team is quite small, and then the team that would have made Battlegrounds is even smaller than that. That's my
Okay,
understanding. I could be
sure.
wrong on that. But in the case of, say, FromSoft, you have this studio that's large and has been known for kind of putting a whole lot of its development effort behind its games. And we know it for having these extremely unique experiences in all aspects, including the veneer, the visual polish of the game. In that case, do you think it's a disservice to their own IP, or sort of the brand expectations, to see something that is less than original and new, I guess?
I can see how that is an issue. insofar as players could have an expectation and that expectation is not met. But for me, if we're just talking strictly about should a company be sort of reusing assets, I think yes, they should, and we should encourage them to. Now, do we have a live problem? Not only are you making a new game, kind of, but you're also calling it Elden Ring, so you've got additional expectations coming in as well. That the entire gameplay flow, everything that you come to experience with a Souls like, and even more specifically with Elden Ring, are those things going to apply to this game? So you've got this loss somehow in expectation of product.
Hmm.
But I would say expectations, if they can be managed, shouldn't necessarily hold up the ideal.
Okay. Yep. And then I guess in that case, what are the expectations for an Elden Ring game then? And and in this case, it sounds like you don't think that the reuse of assets is a barrier for that. It sounds like we're like, it's kind of worth the sacrifice. But what is the expectation then from your perspective?
I think they're forced to call it Elden Ring, sort of in the title, and lean into that, almost purely because they are reusing so many assets. And if you tried to palm it off as some exclusively new game, and then people load it up and they look around and they're like, this is Limgrave. This is literally the bosses. I think then you would have a ton of problems. So I think
Yep.
by calling it Elden Ring, you kind of alleviate that crowd of people, but now you open yourself up to a different group of expectations, which is, for me, when I play Elden Ring, I play it slowly, I play it methodically, I'm feeling tense, I'm peeking around every corner, beating my head against bosses like 20 times in a row without having to sort of restart an entire run, and you enjoy that. You're used to a certain level of exploration. So it's almost like all of those abstract ideas and expectations are potentially getting sort of copy and pasted in people's minds because it has the Elden Ring title. But the core gameplay loop and the feel of the game is going to be entirely different.
Yeah, and so I think for me on this topic, I don't think I actually said what I I actually think about the asset reuse. I kind of tried to just push back on you to see how you'd respond. But I think this is relevant to my thoughts on it being called an Elden Ring game in general. So for me, first of all, I'm with you on the asset reuse. I have no issue with it. If it means that we get more great games, then that's fine. I appreciate that when a big mainline title comes out, it's got all these original assets. I loved exploring Elden Ring and going to Caelid for the first time and seeing this horrible thing that I'd never seen before.
Yes, yeah.
And I loved Leonia's visuals as well. So maybe there'll be some loss of that sort of visual discovery and stimulation.
Yep. Agreed.
But if having to create those assets got in the way of actually just having a new cool game, yeah, I'm totally on board with just reusing. And similarly, whether or not this game is called Elden Ring, I think I fall in a similar place to you where it's probably the case that it would have been much easier for this new director to, I guess he had an idea of something he wanted to, like, he had a vision of something, and he could probably achieve that much faster by starting with Elden Ring as a skeleton to build on top of. And
Yep.
so for me, as you say, it's almost like, because it's like you have to reverse engineer that it needs to have the name Elden Ring, because at some point they probably realized it would make no sense to call this anything but Elden Ring.
Yep.
And so long as you're framing it as a spin-off and not a sequel, I personally do not mind if all of the gameplay was different. Like if this was a strategy game and had no action or RPG or even narrative elements to it, although those all of those things I appreciate about Elden Ring and Dark Souls.
Sure.
I'd be perfectly happy if it had none of those, as long as it is framed as Elden Ring Nightreign and not Elden Ring 2. I think when you put a sequel in, there's a sort of an expectation of a lot of carryover of the previous. What is more important to me is just that the brand quality of FromSoft is achieved. If I play this game and I find it boring or like just doesn't work well, like there's some cool ideas here, but they're really disconnected and it just doesn't turn out very fun,
Okay.
or I have no interest in replaying it beyond the first 5 hours. To me, that is really where the rubber meets the road. Yeah.
How do you how do you feel about? Because I'm in a weird state where I simultaneously think FromSoft are gonna do some really cool stuff, and I'm really excited to play it, and I'm very confident I'm going to have fun. But I'm also generally quite convinced, and in this regard, I'm very pessimistic, that this is their first time entering into a sort of an economy like this. It's a very, if we just use the overused phrase roguelike, that's extremely different. Aiming for a 40-minute mini RPG, or the term that was used, it's so extremely different. I think they're going to make a really good game. I think they're going to make sensible decisions. And I think those decisions are going to be sort of massaged through, but ultimately, it's just not going to be what an Elden Ring Nightreign 2 would be. Like, I think they're going to realize, they're going to release the game, it's going to be a great product, but then they're going to think, you know what, it just didn't have the longevity. We actually didn't put enough systems in place to have replayability. The version 1 of the game is kind of doomed to be far less than what it would be. Now, your conversation earlier was about sort of preserving brand name. Would you see it as a loss of face or a loss of brand name if they produce a game that, like, it's clearly polished and well thought out, but it's just not a 10 out of 10 game? Does that hamper it for you? Or do you kind of, almost like me, I'm assuming that's going to occur, and I assume if they iterate on the format, maybe a version 2 will actually get to where it's meant to be?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's the one that I think the community really needs to talk a lot about. For me, the really tough part about your question is when you said, "What if it isn't a 9 or a 10 out of 10 game?" And for me, that it's so hard to even to answer that part because, well, the answer is it really depends on what makes it a, say, a 7 or a 6 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. Like, what is the part that's falling down? Because if I see that this game has a lot of innovation, there's a lot of cool stuff there. There is a period of time in which I play and I'm like, oh, I get it. And I'm in a flow state and I'm excited and I want to see more, but that just isn't quite enough. To me, that's like, that is fine. That's what I want.
Okay,
And that's what
cool.
I hope for. I don't expect, like you're saying, I don't expect it to be the perfect game. This is the first time they're doing something like this, and this is, as far as I understand, this new director's first opportunity in this position. So to put the expectations of a Miyazaki game that's had the whole company behind it, that's had a number of iterations in the series, I think that's ridiculous. I think that's an absurd expectation.
Sure.
But then when I think, say, about Demon Souls, I think there was already enough there that you had a pretty amazing game. And it's pretty clear come the time of Dark Souls that they were able to figure out whatever they learned in between Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Dark Souls was a massively successful game, right?
Right.
And so that's what I'm kind of hoping for. I'm almost hoping that this game is, it's gonna sound weird, but I'm almost hoping this game has a level of jank and oddity
Okay.
and an unrefinement to it because I think it's exciting to play the unrefined versions of a game as long as the core of what's there is still interesting. Like I would have liked to be there for the Demon Souls despite all its flaws. And likewise, you could say Elden Ring is just the. A lot of people would argue, Elden Ring is just the apex of where Dark Souls was going. But a lot of the things that people might look down on that Dark Souls had to offer, in my mind, is still like it's great not only in spite of its flaws, but partly because of them. If that makes sense.
Wow, okay, I didn't expect you to flip that. Like, my question was kind of like, if the product we get isn't the Dark Souls 1, is there going to be a loss in brand name? So I was assuming either like a neutral or a negative. But then you kind of spun it around and you're like, you know what, even if it is jank, if anything, I'm kind of excited about that. Because you kind of get to go on the journey and see the IP, you see it progress. You get to see the work in progress. and you're like excited to
Yes.
be a part of that journey. That's so fascinating. You've turned it into a positive.
Maybe some people will know the game Heroes of Might and Magic 3, which I think for most people that enter that sort of series now would feel. Well, I know I've introduced it. I tried to make you play it. I tried to make my wife play it as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like it felt impenetrable, and I could see why. But even with the flaws there, it's not just that you can appreciate a game despite its flaws. If you really like love a game deeply, there's a positive to many negatives. Um, I know Final Fantasy VIII as well is a great example where the junction system is one of the most reviled systems around, and it is a grind fest and it's ridiculously unintuitive. But when you kind of get the hang of it, it's like there's really cool combos you can get there, and I think that's sort of what I'm hoping for from this game is that, oh man, it's so rough around the edges, but there's these like quirky things about it that when you really come to appreciate them.
Cool. I think that actually encapsulates really nicely what I meant by I'm sure they're going to have really designed things well, made intentional decisions, thought about them well, massaged it, and made it into a great product. And that's true even if in the future they look back and they iterate and they think, oh no, we did make mistakes. You can still have an exciting, like, sort of complete product, even if we
Yes,
look back one day and
yes.
think, we really thought that was okay.
Well, yeah, sure, but I would even go a step further and say that we might look back at that and say we missed that, even though it seems like a flaw. Well, I think no better illustration I can give for you anyway than people saying Elden Ring is just like it is the evolution of the Dark Souls genre, and going open world was the perfect choice. It's like there's a lot of good there. I think even you, the most stringent defender of the more linear format. I think you can agree that there are things you get from open world,
That's
but
true.
I know you would still point to Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, and be like, yeah, but you see this? You might not like this, but the consequences of it not being there are overwhelming.
Yeah, no, you're exactly correct. You convinced me on that. Hey, so we've got an entire shift of format. Elden Ring, as we know it, this long-term RPG is shifting into this mini RPG or short
Sure.
RPG, whatever they got marketed as. How much of a concern for you is it that there's going to be eight bosses or eight endgame bosses, I should say, for the final night? There's this kind of this limited content, and then it's kind of done. There's a level of finality to it, I guess.
For me, that would probably be where the most concern is. I'm still very optimistic. This is where I can understand where people in the community would be concerned, especially I've seen the point made about a variety of content. Like as far as I understand, you have the 3 days leading up to the fight with the night. I can't remember what they call the night boss or something like that. You each time, no matter which boss you pick, you'll be going through this randomized version of Limgrave. And there's a lot of things that can be different. Like apparently, it's sometimes Limgrave can have a big volcano or a big swamp, and there's a lot of randomness to that Limgrave. But I don't think if I go to the second or third boss, I'm now getting a randomized Leonia. So I think this is where it's like, oh, I could see problems potential. Like I could see the potential for problems here because even if they influence certain changes, it's still going to be at some point you've been going through Limgrave this many times. You've probably seen the same, like a lot of the same things. I assume that this will be broken up into chunks, and those chunks will have small amounts of randomization within them. But nonetheless, at some point, I'll be like, oh, this is one of the forts, so I know I have an intuition about some things I can find in there, and then so it becomes more about hyper optimizing. But you start to lose the novelty of seeing this stuff.
Yep.
Um, so I think that's the potential concern related. Like it's a related problem to the bosses, but the bosses themselves, I'm not sure. Again, it really comes down to execution because maybe it is the case you're a decent player and either you're solo or you've got two friends and you kind of clear through them all relatively quickly. Like, let's say you've beaten all eight bosses within the first 3 days of the game coming out, then it's kind of like Well, I don't really want to go make a new character because that doesn't really like that.
Yeah, that's
That
true.
doesn't make sense as a term for this game. Like, I can't go and re-experience all of Elden Ring in this context with a new character using a different build. It's really just okay. Well, I guess I'll roll this other character for this one instance and beat the final boss again. And so there's that concern that you could end up kind of gorging the content, and then you've kind of got no food left over, and then the game's like just kind of sitting there with 25 hours played or whatever. I think that could be a concern. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like your sort of invoking this idea of novelty, but then that the novelty kind of gets old. And now your example is kind of like a fort. You kind of learn what to expect, and then your logic kind of went to it being more about hyper optimization. I think this novelty idea could actually be unpacked a level further because there's going to be randomization, as you said, like a volcano or a meteor or other stuff happening. I think a lot of this stuff it has an excitement factor, but that excitement factor fades when it's like, oh, it's this event again. It's kind of cool that Margit can come chase you randomly, but the third time that happens, is that is that going to feel good? You know, I kind of think about people who make souls. There's randomized runs that you can do. And this happens for Pokemon as well. I don't know if you've ever done a randomized Souls game, but we've definitely both done randomized Pokemon content.
Hmm.
And I think for the first time, it's really novel. You know, you're going up Forest of the Fallen Giants, Dark Souls 2. You know, you're used to this really sort of easy boss that you just hide behind their leg and like hit it. You know, it's kind of cool in a randomized run where you go through the fog door and you're like, what am I gonna get today? And suddenly it's a smelter demon, and you're like, whoops. You know, it's super exciting. But I think the third time you do a randomized run, it's like, okay, what am I going to get this time? Is it something killable, or do I just have to skip this boss because there's no way I can actually kill a smelter demon with my +1 wooden
Mm.
club? The whole novelty factor actually ceases to become relevant. Same thing with the Pokemon example. It's cool the first time when you're doing a randomized Nuzlocke and it turns out your starter is a Mew, but then kind of the next time it's like, okay, cool. I guess this time I got a Bronzong. I mean, it's going to affect things a little bit, but novelty is extremely limited, and I'm very scared if the core gameplay loop is going to be reliant on randomization that kind of relies on novelty. I don't see that as helpful.
Mm.
But I separate all of that discussion from a discussion of, I guess, what I call purpose. So something like Slay the Spire has ascension levels,
Yes.
and so that's promoting replayability and interest. Even though you're versing the same, I think it only has 3 bosses in like Act 3. Is that accurate for Slay the
I think
Spire?
I think
Literally
that's
three
about
bosses.
right because there's the wolf thing, there's Dono and Decker, there's the Time Lord. I don't know if there's another one.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there you go. But you've got this added purpose that each time you're fighting it, you're kind of trying to unlock a new ascension level. It's a fresh challenge, and I see that as separate from novelty.
Hmm. Okay.
Do you how is this supposed to have purpose? Do you think? Do you think they're going to try to ascension levels or
Yeah, I think that's something that we can only speculate on at this point. I think some of the clues we have. So one, it's as you say, it's called something like a mini RPG or a micro RPG, and it sounds like they're saying it's going to be what like 1 hour per 3 nights. So there's already a key difference between this and sort of randomizer runs, which you've pointed out are very reliant on novelty. I find Pokemon because of the sheer variety of randomness in what you can get, I find that's got a little more to it than Dark Souls ones for me.
okay, I hear that.
But this is already different because it's purposefully built around the shorter sessions with randomness in mind. Like it's built, the game is built up from that rather than it being injected into the game. So, so that's a positive. Now, the other thing that I think is an important clue is that they have mentioned there are 8 bosses, and I could be wrong. I can't remember the language they used, the impression I got was you're going to be playing against this first boss until you've beat it, and then you're going to try the second boss.
Oh, really?
I might have that completely wrong. Maybe all can be done in any order, or maybe you get like tiers of two or three. But when it was spoken about, that was what happened in my head. So somehow the nodes connected, and it was like, oh, we're going through them sequentially.
Okay, interesting.
Could be completely wrong. Now, I don't think if it is a sequential sort of thing, I don't think that will lend itself as much to to the long-term replayability. And that might be where the design is quite different from, say, a roguelike. It might be intentionally made such that it's expecting you to fail at each boss roughly, say, 5 to 10 times, with more so towards the end and less so towards the start. Maybe maybe they expect you to beat the first boss on your second try or something like that.
Sure.
And so there's this expectation that most people will be getting about 40 hours by the time they beat the last boss. And then you've got a night like a nice experience with actually a decent amount of hours. And there's just no like they don't have an impetus to make it last longer than that. I think that's okay. Like I don't think that that is a taboo to say that, but that is different in my mind from something like Slay the Spire, where there's a lot of variety in the content through the cards and whatnot, as you've pointed out, and likewise there's a lot of variety in the loot by the sounds of it in Elden Ring Night Rain. But there is this very intentionally designed challenge that it's very hard for most people to accurately predict that they can beat like a high level ascension run from the start, right?
Yeah, I guess that is true.
It's enjoyable because of that, because you're kind of challenging yourself on your decisions and learning from that. It might not be the case for that in Elden Ring Night Rain. I'm just not sure. The other thing to point out about, I guess, randomizers in similar sorts of games, one thing that I've become aware of recently is there's this community of people who play Super Metroid with a randomizer. My friend has told me a lot about this recently. Apparently, what happens is all the rooms are kind of shuffled and jumbled up, and you're not sure which direction to go, and you're not sure where you're going to have the right power ups to that are more favorable about the against the right bosses. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the run. And even though this is a game that's kind of well known and has been around for a long time, my understanding is there's a lot of skill in kind of navigating that unpredictability and trying to make the right decisions, and also kind of holding your own in a tough room where you don't have enough power ups, sort of thing, and knowing when to skip something, when not to, that sort of thing. And where the things get super interesting for me is that they do competitions where you both get the same seed and it's a race who can
Right.
get to the end first. Now, I don't suspect Night Rain will have anything like that. However, that could be a way of injecting some sort of late game long term replayability. It could be the case that for the casual player, I say casual, but I assume beating the final boss will probably be extremely difficult. But let's say the average player who's good at the game can get like it's considered done when they beat that final boss. Maybe either in an update or a DLC, or maybe coming packaged with the game, they could have a system where it's like, okay, there's three of you on a team or one of you, and then another team of one or three, and it's like you're going against each other, and who's going to actually beat the Night Lord first. So you're going to both, assuming you both survive, you're going to get to the Night Lord at the same time, but then who's geared up enough to beat it first? Like that could be like a way of there's I feel like novelty is a gateway into a game like this, and then if it's done well, the hyper optimization can be the thing that takes it further. It can be the thing that, okay, there's no more novelty to this fort, but I know in my head that there's like I can put a value in it. Like there's a 60% chance that I'll get something average, but a 20% chance that I get something great. And do I want to take that chance? Is it worth
Yeah.
it, or is it better to go to this other
Yeah.
thing? Those kind of things become way more interesting when either it's extremely difficult to win, or you're in competition, I feel like.
It's so fascinating. Because for a while you were talking, and I was thinking to myself, man, I just don't think I care that much about hyper optimization. I don't really care about trying to min max, trying to do a run as fast as I can. When I play something like Elden Ring, it's the experience. It's each engagement
Yes.
is a challenge, and
Yes.
I don't care about the timer kind of thing. So I was kind of like, oh man, I don't personally care for that. But then I think, well, I actually kind of do in other systems. When I'm playing Slay the Spire, I really actually do kind of care about knowing the underlying logic that if you haven't got a potion in a few rooms, actually your chance of getting a potion goes up. And actually, I really love that. So
Mm.
it's a kind of weird thing. And this is coming from the person who just earlier went on a rant about sort of having expectations and calling it an Elden Ring game. It loads you with expectations for gameplay that are going to be thwarted by this completely different game. And even I myself am like, oh man, I don't know if I want that. But then I'm like, I do want that in other circumstances. So
Mm.
that's fascinating. Yeah, interesting. Also, commentary on like having seeded runs, and you could have teams kind of competing on the same seed. It's really hard for me to quite understand how much the different seeds will matter. Maybe that sounds like a daft comment, but in a game like Binding of Isaac, for example, you go into a room, the amount of different items you could get,
Yes.
like it change your play style completely at
Yes.
times. But in Elden Ring, I'm like, I just don't quite understand what the randomization is supposed to do. It's like, oh, do I get a broadsword or do I get a longsword? Or do I get, oh, I have to use a halberd this time? That's qualitatively very different to,
Mm.
well, I mean, I've never played Binding of Isaac, so I can't think of any examples. I just know that crazy stuff can happen.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where in Isaac there is so much randomness, but there's also I would say it's a game that on the face looks like a game that people enjoy because of how much variety and randomness there is to it. But the real reason people like it is because of how many opportunities there are for you to express your knowledge and skill. Like in the face of so much randomness, there are so many decisions you can make. So many decisions to try and push things, that 0.5% more. I'm just dialing up the notch just a little bit that I will get something good. And you can stack those decisions. There'll be hundreds of those opportunities in each run. And by the end of it, you can definitely see the difference between somebody who knows what they're doing and somebody who doesn't. And I think it's hard sometimes to separate that from the mechanical skill, because I think a lot of people just die because early on because they just don't quite know how to play the bullet hell style of Binding of Isaac. But when you kind of get past that, it's really all about your decisions in the run. With this Elden Ring Nightreign game, my understanding is that the enemies and locations will drop certain forms of loot. That loot will have different stats. So I could it's true that I could get a broadsword or a longsword from my understanding. The broadsword might be an unusually better broadsword than normal. So in that case, it becomes a pretty obvious choice that I pick the broadsword. But then there could be a lot of situations that it's hard to predict whether they will or won't be the case. But let's take, for example, there's a broadsword, and I know how to use straight swords decently. I'm not good with a bow, but I found a bow that's really good. Do I make the choice of taking the bow? That's a somewhat, that's a loosely interesting decision. But then I think things might become more interesting when you've got heroes with special powers and abilities that, as far as I understand, can synergize better with different weapons. And also, we don't know if there are magical properties to the weapons, or at least I don't. Maybe they've announced that. It could be, there's a lot of really fascinating weapons in Elden Ring that have like wildly different effects. And I don't know how far this game is willing to push in that direction. Are there going to be a lot of things with wildly different effects? Or are we even going to see a lot of things with mildly different effects that can stack up to something interesting? So in the case of an ARPG, you can get excited about seeing that you picked up a bow that's for the most part pretty normal, but it might have something like it deals extra fire damage and some other property, and you know that, hey, I've got this other thing that can set enemies on fire with my fire damage. So the fact that my bow does fire damage now
Yeah, you.
means all of my attacks are going to set people on fire. I would be really interested to see the ways in which you could combine your skills and abilities and weapons with that of your teams. Like, are there really cool ways of I've got this sword that's doing like frenzy stuff, and I know that you've got something that really helps with frenzy stuff, or like it gets benefited by frenzy stuff. Like that stuff could be cool, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit scared because at that point you are inventing an entire complex economy of interacting systems,
Mm,
and that is no joke.
yes.
That's extremely difficult.
Yeah, that's true. Let's take the worst case scenario. Maybe some people wouldn't consider this bad. I don't know. It seems pretty bad to me.
Okay.
But let's say the game is literally just it's Elden Ring, except you basically have your horse's mobility. You have characters that start with a unique weapon, and they can only use certain unique weapons. So it's like I picked this character, I can't use broadswords. The map is essentially just Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula kind of rearranged in different ways, and it's just going to pick either the nameless king or the centipede demon or Margit as the boss at the end of the world.
Yep.
In that case, and I guess and the other thing that we know, there will be randomly dropped loot from enemies, and that loot can have different stats. So you could get halberds that are just better or worse than they were in the base Elden Ring game. In that example, in that worst case scenario where there's nothing really new being added, what are your thoughts on the game? How close is that to being something interesting?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of think that's what most people are expecting in their minds.
Mm,
And I kind of am expecting something like that too. We've just had some conversation about a complex underlying economy and systems that all interact and synergize. It's weird to say that I haven't really thought about that. And I was assuming this worst case that you've just laid out. And I think that is a good example of what I was saying earlier, where I'm like, you know what, this is still going to be a fun game. That's kind of what I was expecting, and I'm still positive with that.
interesting. I think if it was that and there was beyond that, there's no innovation, I would be okay with it. I think I would be. I would find the game adequate. I am hoping and maybe falsely expecting there to be at least a little more than that. Something like there's a bit more to the loot and the randomness of the locations that things just it gets exciting. I
Yeah,
think
okay. I think we're actually entirely on the same page with that. Adequate's a
okay,
good way to
okay.
put it. Yeah, I'm happy with it, but by that I mean it's adequate. The
Yeah.
two of us, we're still going to load in, and we're still going to have a great time.
I think that sort of we're splitting up, we're exploring, we're finding interesting things, getting like, small boosts in power on day one, but now we're kind of setting goals for day two. Those goals become extra meaningful because you're like, we need to get as much of this done on day two as we can. And it's going to be hard. So we got to take risks. And I think you've pointed out traditionally, FromSoft games have been about patience, going slow, careful. You can't try to minimize risk.
Yeah.
In this game, if you're on a time limit, I can imagine it's going to have such a different aesthetic. If we're like, okay, day two started, let's get to that dragon now, and we're having a hard time, we're like, crap, we got to beat this thing now. Like we can't waste our time if we want to get the stuff that we
Yeah.
need for the boss.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
even if there's not really much else going on, that alone sounds pretty cool to me, honestly.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for it being a completely different experience, one way or the other. I'm not the sort of person that really enjoys being under time pressure, but I will definitely yield that it's going to force a different gameplay and that will be novel and fun.
Well, I think the other thing that people have shown concern about is the law side of things.
The lore.
The law. I think there's this weird series of emotions most people went through when they saw the nameless king flying in the trailer. There's the first thing of like, first of all, you recognize, okay, the scenes change. What am I looking at now? And then you're like, wait, that they've made a boss that looks a lot like the nameless king there. And then you're like, no, that is the nameless king.
Yes.
And then you're like, what is the nameless king doing here? And your mind starts to like race of like, are they reusing assets because they're lazy? Is the nameless king somehow like actually tied into the Elden Ring lore? Like, which who have I forgotten somewhere in there that he could like be associated with? Or like, is there secretly like a merger between Dark Souls and Elden Ring going on? Um, but then, when all that excitement kind of wears off, the question really is, what is he doing there? And as far as I understand, the director said that this really is a spin-off. The timeline is different from the original Elden Ring. It's almost like both games kind of take place a little bit after the Shattering, but it's like we're going in different directions in time now. So the events are very unrelated from this point onwards. And I assume it's all really just trying to justify the asset reuse. But stuff like the Nameless King being drawn to this world is kind of very sort of hand waved away, like, oh, it's drawing the power of the shattering is drawing lords from different worlds and universes into here. But it sounds a lot like we're just not really meant to take it very seriously. Like it's not canon
Yeah,
stuff.
that was my approach.
I've got some more points, but I'm really interested. Yeah, what did you think when you saw the trailer? What went through your mind, and what do you kind of think at this point about the whole topic?
Yeah, okay. You were going on for a while about all like kind of different theories, and I'm like, man, I didn't even entertain those thoughts, which is so funny because like I actually really love diving into the lore and being immersed in a game world. I tend to really like that, and I expect there to be cohesion in it for it to make sense.
Hmm.
But I guess when I see a game like this, my mind just goes to something like Dota 2, League of Legends, the recent
Yeah.
Marvel rivals. I'm sure there is some canon in the background of how all the heroes got summoned together for a big sort of battle royale. But fundamentally, I'm just like, I just see it as separate. I don't care. All the Marvel characters are here. They're having a tussle.
Yep.
And it's like, it's almost I just make an assumption that there is no lore.
No, I think that was what I thought as well when I first at the by the end of the trailer, and I'd kind of gone through my thoughts. I'm like, it's just not like it's not relevant.
Okay, interesting. I didn't expect you to conclude the same. Do you think by attempting to explain a law that it can come across? Do you think by attempting to explain a law, you kind of you come across as hand waving or trying to sort of post rationalize, and that can end up leaving a sour taste in people's mouth? Have you read anything like that?
In this case, I don't know what the reaction to his exact explanations of it. I know there was a lot of ranging opinions from the trailer when it became clear that things were being reused from Dark Souls, and but I don't know what the reaction specifically to this director's point is.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess I was just kind of wondering. I wonder if it's just better left unsaid.
Yeah, no, well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know what people have reacted to it, but for me, I think it's weird because it's almost like I don't want him to say anything so that I can just speculate, which I think is an attractive quality of especially the lore in FromSoft games. There's a lot of speculation. I think they do a great job of just sprinkling in enough for you to put a bunch of pieces together, but then leaving huge gaps for your imagination to fill it in. And so if I see the Nameless King and I have no one say anything about it, it's like I'm left going, "Why? What the heck? Why is he here?"
Sure,
And I can
sure.
I can fit in all the theories myself. But when but when he did explain that, oh, it's a different timeline, and the power of the shattering attracts lords from different realms, it it definitely did kind of just come across to me as you don't want you don't want people to be disappointed that there is no story here, but you're really not going to give any story here.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yep, I hear that.
I think one thing that we can get from this that people like Vardy have pointed out is we can still probably glean information about the past, and that could give us context for stuff that happens in the mainline series. Okay, well, there's this thing I always wanted an answer to in the original Elden Ring. This kind of gives me an answer. I don't know that I can completely trust it, but it does give me an answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a good point. Even if this is meant to sort of canonically be a separate event, and so it doesn't impact on the mainline series, sort of from present going forward. Yeah, I guess you're absolutely right. Those characters are still those characters.
Yes,
It's not like the Nameless King who was suddenly born to different parents.
that's right. I think the question for the people that are interested in the world is more that how much does this game need to adhere in a strict way to the sort of the background that is set by, I guess, Miyazaki, George R. R. Martin, and the game of Elden Ring. Is it the case that now it's kind of just we're just really only focused on making a game and we don't care at all about lore, so things are going to be kind of put in, with some respect, but mostly just kind of haphazardly, or is there like a strict process of making sure that okay, if I put this enemy with this enemy, like it might make sense for gameplay, but those two would never be side by side in a narrative sense. So I can't do that. Will that sort of procedure be followed or not? I think that's probably the more interesting question.
Yeah, actually, I think you're right because I think things like movies have long already had this as a precedent, and people are kind of happy with this idea that okay, this set of Star Wars media, this is all canon, but all of this stuff is other canon, is not canon, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, cool. I mean,
Yeah.
that's fine. I mean, you still expect stormtroopers to behave like stormtroopers, and the Sith to be Sith-like. I do wonder what the average player base is going to accept. Are they going to see it? Is it like movies where you can just have non-canon stuff, and that's fine. That's totally cool. Just spin a new story. If the story's good, the story's good. I don't care that it didn't happen in sort of the main narrative.
Well, I don't really have anything else on this topic. I don't know about you.
There's definitely a few things I'm gonna have to think on more. Like, is this whole timer idea cursed? Like, I can feel it within myself. Why can't we just have a non-timer version? It's like eating away,
Ah
and
man, yeah.
there's other topics there, but I need to think on it more.
Yeah, we're very different on that. I love the idea
You
of
love
having
it,
a
okay?
timer.
All right, all
I
right.
love being I love being under time pressure. I like that.
I'm gonna hold you to it
All right.
when we're playing, and you're like, "Yo, you wanted this. You wanted this."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Thanks for the chat, man.
Sure.
Talk to you soon.
See ya.